crossroads, we had a little discussion in our working group yesterday, which was quite interesting because what I'm briefly going to tell you about now is something that was raised already yesterday, which is a good sign because it shows that somehow we've had a finger on the pulse of this community here. Today, I think we have reached a stage in which we can legitimately ask what is the explicit and the implicit aims of the different data collection documentation activities that we are undertaking today. Many of us are running around doing this, doing that, doing surveys, making reports, looking at things going on in DRC, in Sierra Leone, in, I don't know, East Timor, wherever. What is the purpose? And I think it does merit some discussion, is that the reason for which we are doing it should be explicit in our minds, because the methods that we use will depend on the reason for which we are doing it. And more or less, broadly speaking, we can identify 4 groups. We can identify data collection and documentation for criminal prosecution. We can data collection and documentation for program planning, so for operational purposes, data and documentation for advocacy, and data and documentation for academic purposes, very simply scholarly work. Scholarly work, no, this is a good enough reason. Many of these override each other, overlap. They are not hermetically sealed boxes, but they should constitute the main goal of your exercise. We should have in our mind why we are doing it. After that, if it serves other purposes, well, all the better. But we should have in our mind what we need. So first of all, you have the program planning and policy. For example, there was a countrywide population survey by Médecins Sans Frontières, which showed that almost 1 million people in rural Burundi, a fifth of the rural population, were excluded from healthcare as a direct consequence of the government's policy of cost recovery. This is a very important policy survey. This means that if you get something like that as concrete, as clear from Burundi, you can then show the World Bank, the IMF, or I don't know who else is responsible for the policies of the healthcare cost recovery program, that you have done something which is actually excluding more than a fifth of your population. This is a very important operational type of study. Very often these surveys are also, as we all know, many of you are from NGOs, are done. They are quick and dirty. There's nothing bad about being quick and dirty, because the reason they do it is they need a turnaround in 1 week's time, and they reorient their program in a matter of 3 weeks, because they need to know what they have to do next month. They don't need to have 1 year of work in which you get published after 1.5 years, and then it's too late for anything anyway. So that's program planning and policy. Second is advocacy. The Darfur Atrocities Documentation Team, the Coalition for International Justice, CIA, maybe the CIA also actually, and the American Bar Association. They did the report to the United Nations and to the International Commission of Inquiry on Darfur. Why did they do it? It is methodologically very weak. It can be torn down at any stage. They did it because they wanted to draw attention to the tragic situation in Darfur, and that is legitimate, but that was the reason. They wanted to draw attention of US Congress to Darfur. The third is academic work. You have very scholarly works. These are people who do work on history. They are historians. They are very often statisticians or historians. They do work on things like the Boer uprising in South Africa, but they also do more modern ones, the Indonesian massacres. This one I've just taken, an example. Robert Cripps. There's also Ben Kiernan from the Yale Center for Genocide Studies. These are people who study for years and years and years Cambodia or East Timor, and they know everything there is to know, and then they publish work looking at what happened. This is important. History is important. Past is what determines the present and the future. And lastly, criminal prosecution. You do documentation. You collect data for such as human rights reports. You have the forensic guys who collect data from the Guatemala. We had somebody from the Guatemala Center. These are people who piece together information to pull together a dossier for criminal prosecution or other legal pursuits. Unresolved issues. Monitoring MDGs better in conflict. MDGs influence global policies. we'll go through these. I'll give you an example of each of these. Usefulness of ratios. I'll give you an example of what's going on in natural disasters. They're simple and practical. Significance of denominators. No epidemiologist can make a presentation without mentioning denominators, so we have to squeeze it in somewhere. So Paul will do it as well. A question of definitions and a question of exposure. How big is the problem? Monitoring MDGs better in conflict. Now, what we have seen, this is all very, very preliminary research that we've been looking at. MDGs are a important instrument of global policy. Make no mistake. I mean, we might think that the statistics are all there, but MDGs do drive global policy. MDGs do drive the World Bank policies on development aid. They are very important. Now, if you look at most of the MDG statistics on the conflict-affected countries, here we just have taken Liberia, and MDGs are mostly drawn from the WDI. That's the World Development Indicators, right? Yeah, World Development Indicators. The red line is the line what line of the CMRs reported by the MDG on Liberia through all these years, and these are the mortality survey results for mortality from Liberia that we hold in our CDAT database. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that you have this very essentially artificial line of crude mortality rate that is reported to the MDGs, whereas in reality, when you look at all the different surveys that are going on, almost none of them even approach the levels that the MDG reports, and most of them actually are way beyond, way much higher. So how representative are the MDG statistics on these countries, and should we not do better to be able to have the MDGs that reflect better the conflict? So I'm sure the situation is the same for Sierra Leone, for Angola, for Burundi, etc. Usefulness of ratios. Many years ago, Michel Lecher, the man who actually started CRED, who founded CRED, and David Alexander, who's now in Florence, had an idea. And the idea was a very simple idea. It didn't go anywhere, but I think it merits some rethinking now. The idea was that, is there a systematic range of injuries to deaths after earthquakes? Do they more or less come within a certain range, the number of injuries to a death? And they put together an analysis looking at they did much more complicated stuff than this, looking into the intensity as well, and so on and so forth. But they came out with saying that in most cases, the number of injuries per death ranges between 3 and 4. I mean, we've put in the figures over here. It's a little broader than that, 2.5 to 4 maybe. But this kind of ratios gives you a very seat of the pants idea. When you have 50,000 dead, estimated 50,000 dead, you have to be prepared for about 150,000 injuries. That is the purpose for doing it. They're simple and practical. As I said, they're seat of the pants kind of tools, not sophisticated tools, but can be quite